Have you ever taken a bus and stepped off somewhere that wasn't your destination, only to find the city around you a note out of tune, like someone had shifted the keys? That's where we start. Uncover Setealem, creepy stories you need to hear. They call it Setealem. Say it once with me, Setealem, Setealem, a word that shows up in old Brazilian forums, in late-night chat threads, and in whispered messages passed along by people who swear they came back wrong, or that someone close to them did. Some say the name comes from a misspelling, others insist it's older, a contraction of Setealem, 7 beyond, a number and a direction folded into one word. What matters isn't the etymology. What matters is the pattern. Ordinary places that tilt and reveal a darker reflection, and the same little fingerprints left across different lives. Buses, drains, showers, necklaces, motorcycles, time that stretches and snaps like a rubber band. Before we dive in, these are submitted accounts. They arrive by email, through anonymous forms, or in comments on message boards where people still keep old threads alive. I don't know which ones are true. Neither will you after the first listen. That's the point. Each story arrives with its own evidence, an audio clip, a photo, a receipt, a trembling voice in a message that still sounds like it's holding someone back from shouting. Some of the details are small and tactile. The smell of diesel on a winter night, the way a bathroom light flickers 3 times before going out. Others are impossible to verify. 7 missing days, a child returning with no memory but a green shirt, a dog with a collar stamped Setealem. If you like this kind of thing, if you enjoy late-night compilations of the uncanny, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories if we keep digging. Luciano's account came in with a timestamp that placed it on a weekday evening, the kind of commute that eats you in silence. He says he boarded like any other night, work tired, headphones on, a thermos of bad coffee. The bus was half full. People looking at their phones, the usual bruises of fluorescent light, the faint metallic scent of brakes. It was raining, the kind of steady, soft rain that makes every sound smudge a little. He boarded, sat, and a woman 2 rows ahead of him kept turning around. That small motion. It seemed attentive at first, then like a countdown. The bus rolled through the city in its habitual slow, right? But then small things began to leak into the routine. The driver stopped at a corner he never stopped at. A man at the back folded his newspaper and looked directly at Luciano, not with surprise but with insistence, the way someone insists you look at a scar you didn't know you had. The woman who had been turning around now rose, put her hand to the glass and whispered something to the window that he couldn't hear. A little girl in a yellow raincoat pressed her face to the fogged window and stared at him with eyes that were too dark. Luciano remembers thinking she looked like she was looking through him, not at him. When he asked the driver casually, "Is this the route to Rua das Flores?" The driver answered the dashboard, not him, and the engine hummed like a trapped animal. At some stop, a group of 3 people in dark jackets stood up and moved toward him, polite at first. "Sir, you should get off now." And their politeness had no room for argument. They were smiling. He stepped off because the door was there, and because their smiles had folded around the exit like a thing that wanted him away. The bus moved on without him. Luciano says he watched it pull away, and the city behind it had rearranged itself. The street names didn't match their signs. The baker's window carried pastries he didn't recognize. A poster on the telephone pole had a date 2 years from now. He took a cab. Because why wouldn't you take a cab when your surroundings have slipped? The cab driver squinted at him like people do when they know they're not supposed to know. At home, his apartment had a smell he couldn't place. Oil and something like seaweed. And his clock read 20 minutes forward. He called his mother. She didn't pick up. Later that night, an unknown number flashed, and a voice asked if he had taken a bus. The account is precise in the ordinary stuff. The make of the bus, the license plate fragment he could read, the exact line of muffled conversation, but vague where it matters. The faces of the people on the bus, the why of their insistence. Friends who've known Luciano for years say he started sleeping with the light on after that. He refuses to ride buses on rainy nights. One follow-up message ended with 3 words, It watches roads. There are ways to read Luciano's story that don't require other worlds. People miss exits. Panic and bright lights scramble memory. A group of strangers could have been part of a coordinated scam or a social test. Yet there are details that sit at the edge of plausibility. The poster with a future date. The way multiple witnesses across different submissions mention people who smile like they know where the door is. Those are the fingerprints we keep returning to. A normal space, a small instruction or sign, then the dissonant echo of time. Think about getting on your morning bus tomorrow. The metal smell, the cold handle, the way a stranger's knee brushes yours. Now imagine at some point where the driver does something off the script and a tiny, polite voice somewhere tells you to get off. What would you do? Next, Antonia. Her email was shorter and she asked for anonymity. She wanted me to call her by her first name only, which I honor. She wrote in Portuguese at first, then switched to English. The translation is hers. Antonia lived with her daughter, a little girl who was 6 at the time of the incident. They had moved to a new neighborhood a month earlier, and were still learning where the bakeries were and which laundromat would actually return socks. One afternoon, midweek, Antonia left for work and her daughter stayed with a neighbor. She had called at lunch to check on her. The girl said something small and ordinary. "I want the green shirt today." And then there was a pause, a cluck of static, and the call dropped. Antonia called again and again, but no answer. She called the neighbor, who said the girl never came over. She ran home. The door was unlocked. The house smelled of something faintly chemical, like detergent soaked into fabric for too long. The bed was made. Toys were stacked. On the couch, a child sat in a green shirt that Antonia did not own. Her daughter came to her, ran into her arms, and said, calm as a bell, "I was in Setealem. It was 7 days." There are different ways those 7 days are explained in these accounts. Sometimes it feels like the child counted them. Sometimes the adult later realizes calendar days are missing. Antonia swore her wallet had records. She left for work at 8 in the morning, and only an hour had passed. Her boss confirmed a morning meeting. Her neighbor remembered a knock at the door that morning, nothing more. Antonia says her daughter described staircases that led nowhere, and a staircase that led to a place with white tiles and a woman who said, "Hold the child." The girl called the woman the old one, and indicated she had been guided back by following a stairwell that smelled of wet cement. When the girl said Setealem, her voice was neither frightened nor elated, just flat, like someone who'd come home after work and was explaining a commute. Antonia fixed the green shirt and asked her what she ate there. The girl said she didn't eat but watched people with pale lips. She kept saying the number 7 until Antonia started to feel the number like a physical thing pressed to the back of her throat. Neighbors called social services. There were interviews. Some therapists suggested dissociation or a memory lapse. A few commenters on the forum, where Antonia later posted slices of her story, suggested staged abduction to attract attention, or a prank by older children. Some users, though, found a pattern. Other parents reporting that their children came back with little changes, a line of scab on the wrist shaped like a tiny hook, a new favorite song that none of the adults had ever played, an insistence on a stairwell. The stairwell detail recurs like a motif. Antonia moved with her daughter to a different part of the city. She sleeps with the hallway light on now. Her daughter's green shirt is sewn into a quilt that Antonia won't let anyone touch. It's a quiet, household kind of terror, the ordinary rearranged in one subtle, impossible way. Then there was Julio, which is the kind of story that turns a simple trip to the mall into an exercise in looking for seams. He wrote in a voice that alternated between flippant and rattled. Julio was in a mall he knew well, familiar escalators, the scent of lemon cleaner, a small bookstore with a chipped sign. He went into the bathroom on the 3rd floor and walked out into a place that wasn't the mall he had entered. He says the corridor outside the stalls was longer. The lights buzzed a little different, like someone had tuned a radio between stations. Stores that had been closed for months now displayed goods that felt wrong, a toy shop that sold dolls with 2 large heads, a shoe store that had stacks of yellowed sneakers with laces threaded through in impossible patterns, a kiosk selling newspapers with headlines that read like fiction, children in the hallway, kids who shouldn't have been there at that hour, had eyes that in one word he used were wrong, the word he repeated twice in his message, black. Julio's phone died during the first 10 minutes he was lost, which is a detail that shows up in submissions like this. Electronics failing at critical points. He tried to retrace his steps. The shop seemed to rearrange when he glanced away. Once he swore he saw something that looked like a child leaning from a store window, calling silently with her finger to her lips. A salesperson told him, in a tone that suggested they were reading from the same script as everyone else he had met that night, that the public restroom on the second floor had been closed for repairs for 2 weeks. Julio insisted he had used the third floor. He eventually shoved through a door that took him back to the mall he knew, an exit with glass that fogged where his breath hit. He ran to his car, keys shaking in his hand. He found, in the pocket of his jacket which he hadn't worn that day, a receipt for a pastry he hadn't bought. The time on the receipt was 20 minutes ahead. He kept the receipt. He says now that whenever he walks into a shopping center he looks at the tiles, counting them like someone who has developed a new compulsion. We could rationalize Julio. Tiredness, alcohol, a prank by friends, a memory bad enough to feel like a missing reel. But the black eyes, other messages mention children like that, or photos sent in that were grainy and impossible to verify, and yet they pull at something primitive inside you. Eyes as a motif, a human face with a missing warmth. It's a detail that makes us feel observed by someone who isn't human in the way we understand. Tom, sometimes called Tommy in English, sent his story from a small town on the edge of the countryside. He was a young man who took a job working nights on a farm that had been in his family for generations, a place of old barns and iron gates and hugging shadows. He thought he had gotten used to the sound of wind through corn. He thought wrong. One autumn night he was driving home after checking fences. The road was a narrow strip of black, and a motorcycle's headlight appeared behind him and stayed there, the driver never passing. He said the motorcyclist, o motoquero, as several people across different reports call it, was always just behind, never catching up. A presence that matched speed and angle with the uncanny precision of a predator that doesn't hunt for flesh so much as for the exact moment you'll look back. Tom's pickup stalled when he got near the farm. He told me he left the engine running and went to the porch. The farm dog was by his side, teeth flashing faintly in the dark. He heard a step at the counter. He looked, and beneath the old wooden stall, something with red eyes looked back. He didn't go closer. He didn't stay. He woke up the next morning in the bed of a friend with a bruise forming on his temple and his jacket torn. The dog was gone. When he finally found the dog days later, it returned with a collar he swore he hadn't seen before. Narrow, leather, like something you'd find at a market, but with no tags. He found scratch marks on the barn door that looked like letters, but he couldn't make out more than a line or two. He says he's been followed ever since on quiet roads at night, the distant rasp of a motorcycle engine like breath behind him. Tommy's story sits solidly in the motorcyclist motif that threads through many of these accounts. The engine isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the memory of the sound. Sometimes it's the sight of a silhouette that is always in the periphery. Motorcycles in these narratives are liminal vehicles, their riders cloaked, often faceless, and impossible to pin down. Trauma can explain a lot of this. A sudden jolt, a fall, an accident, or an injury that dislocates memory could account for waking somewhere with no recollection. But there's also the way the same textures repeat, vehicles as portals, collars appearing where none existed, a steady insistence that something followed home. The message from Raphael came a week after Tom's, and it introduced a new terrain, water. For him, Setealem smelled like rot and copper and old pipes. Raphael lived in an older building with a shower that always leaked slightly into the bathtub, a small, persistent drip someone had promised to fix. He woke up one night at 3:33 a.m., which is a time that recurs in different accounts, the little signal people mark as a threshold. There's no law dictating this time. It's a motif, an agreed-upon place where the uncanny sits. Raphael's sister had left for work the night before, and the apartment was supposed to be empty. He was washing his face, half asleep, when he heard, under the thrum of the heater, a voice that seemed to come from the drain. It wasn't words at first, just a scrape of breath and the pattern of someone humming a tune he didn't know. The bathroom light flickered. The drain gurgled like someone talking backwards. The smell came, a wet, organic stink that made him imagine old leaves and a fish market closed since sunrise. Then the water rose a little in the sink as if pulled, and for a second he saw, reflected in the metal, a face almost touching the lamplight from underneath the floor. He ran from the bathroom, barefoot on cold tiles, and when he returned the next morning there's a line of black residue at the drain lip that couldn't be scrubbed off. The next week, neighbors mentioned a family down the hall who had abruptly moved and left boxes in the corridor with toys on top. Raphael's message claimed the family vanished, and their door was padlocked. In private messages, he admitted to hearing voices at 3:33 a.m. for nights after, sometimes whispering his name. He put towels into the shower drain to block the sound, and then stopped because the towels made no difference. There are reasonable explanations here: plumbing noises amplified by a building's echo, auditory hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation, or even someone playing a prank with audio equipment. But again, pattern, drains, water, a smell of rot. These keep showing up in unrelated accounts from different cities and different senders. The water element offers a different kind of threshold, something that flows, that erodes boundaries, that can carry sound and, according to some accounts, time. Between stories, I keep seeing the same constellation of elements: a transport vehicle that becomes a trap, a child who returns with days missing and a number, public restrooms that open into other places, a motorcycle that tags the night, drains that whisper, and small objects, collars, necklaces, receipts, that insist they have a life independent of the person who found them. Eyes recur, black, yellow, sometimes red. Time markers recur, 3:33, 7 days, a receipt dated years forward. The internet is where these dots connect, the old Orkut groups, new message boards, the dark edges of the web where archives are passed like contraband. People post cryptic notices, then delete them. Someone screenshotted, another saved it to a folder. You might be asking at this point, why does the story center on Brazil if I'm listening in the US? The core material came through Portuguese posts. Orkut was a social network big in Brazil in the 2000s, a place where these rumors circulated and mutated. Over time, the thread migrated to newer platforms. Cultural specificity matters in flavor. Some references, a certain cadence in the way names are used, a type of urban geography where a bus route might blend into a dense neighborhood. But the pattern is universal, thresholds we cross without noticing. There's a moment in one of the threads where someone posts a scanned photograph of a child's green shirt, frayed at the corner, a small paint smudge on the collar, and the caption reads only, "She came back with this." The photo had a faint watermark in its corner that no one could place. It was one of those images that people keep returning to because it looks like it belongs to several stories at once. I want to pause here, not because the narrative slows, but because the next set of accounts gets darker and stranger in ways that make me uncomfortable to repeat without caution. There are rumors and files, some migrated from the old forums into archived folders on parts of the web that are hard to reach. Names like Alma appear in them, attached to a pale child with the kind of stare that haunts images. But I'm not going to tell you how to find those files or what the steps are to get there. I will say only that those threads show the internet's role in amplifying the phenomenon. Someone posts a detail, and suddenly dozens of people claim to have experienced the same signature. Fear becomes contagious online. Before we go deeper into those files, there's one more story for this first stretch because it ties together drains and the motif of objects crossing worlds. Marta wrote about a gym shower. She was a regular. Late evenings, the smell of chlorine, the quiet rhythm of treadmills and company headphones. One night, the women's locker room filled with steam, like an old photograph someone had rubbed at the edges until the faces blurred. She stepped into the first stall and, when she opened the curtain, the tile was wrong. Cool to the touch, but the steam wasn't the gym's steam. It smelled like a street market at the end of summer. Spices boiling, fish stalls, something sour. An old woman was there sitting on a bench, and she said to Marta, with a tone that made her want to listen closely, "Hold Nina." The oddness was immediate and domestic. The name, the way the old woman said it, as if it tied Marta to something specific. Then the woman disappeared down a corridor that shouldn't have been in a gym. Marta left, wrapped in a towel, feeling as if time had slipped a gear. Later, she saw a small dog with a ragged ear following behind the entrance to her building. It wouldn't leave. Marta named it Nina because she couldn't not. The dog had a burn mark on its neck that looked from a distance like a scar shaped into a word if you squinted. Marta kept the dog. The gym's locker room was renovated 2 weeks later, and the old bench removed. These stories accumulate like sediment. Individually, you can and should count them as anecdote, but together, they press toward a hypothesis. Something about thresholds in our shared spaces, transport, public bathrooms, pipes, stairwells, small objects, creates moments of permeability where ordinary life and something else overlap. Whether that overlap is psychological, folkloric, or metaphysical, is a question each listener must carry. As I sifted through the submissions, the tone of my own voice shifted. Early messages had a wryness. "Isn't this great? Look at these weird urban legends." But then you read the same detail in 3 or 4 different voices. A child's green shirt, a motorcycle at the edge of vision, a stamp of Setealem on an animal collar, a drain that hums your name, and the humor slips. You begin to feel the pressure of patterns. You begin to notice how ordinary objects serve as bookmarks in these people's lives. The world before the object and the world after, separated by a line so fine you could miss it. There are also deliberate attempts to inflate or to frighten. Trolling is part of this ecosystem. Someone posts a story they made up to get attention. Someone else copies the phrasing and a meme is born. People with technical skills have uploaded files that look like evidence but are forged. That's part of the danger, and it's why I keep saying that ambiguity is the only honest posture. None of what follows will be presented as proof. It will be presented as a pattern, a cluster of claims that insist on attention. One of the strangest things about compiling these stories is how sometimes a detail appears across years, and cities with small mutations, eyes black, yellow, or red, time markers of 3:33 or 7, objects appearing with no provenance, motorbikes. When a motif shows up in Guatemala and Porto Alegre, and in a small town in the Midwest, you have to consider whether we're looking at a cultural contagion, a human propensity for pattern recognition, or something with a different ontology entirely. I want to finish this first stretch with a scene that doesn't belong neatly to one submission, but feels like a composite of the worst details. A late bus on a rainy night, a child in a green shirt who returns speaking of 7 days, a drain that hums a name, a motorcyclist that never passes. Imagine them threaded together, how the textures would pile up inside a single life. Imagine sitting on your couch now, the room lit with the light from your screen, and hearing, out of the hum of your building's pipes, the faint scrape of the world shifting. There are files I haven't yet shown, an image of a child's face, pages of early forum discussion in Portuguese, audio with a voice that sounds like it's shaking but determined to tell one last fact. There are messages that arrived with screenshots from old Orkut threads, where the first seeds were planted, and then flickers of the same conversation resurfacing on newer platforms. Those threads are like a tree whose rings hide the weather of different years. Some branches are rotten, some alive. I kept one of those images on my desktop for days, not out of voyeurism, but because the file had a clarity that unsettled me. A pale child, eyes too big, a shirt folded at the collar, and in the background, if you look closely, a door with a scuff that could be a number or a letter. The file metadata was stripped. There was no timestamp. Someone attached the name Alma to that image in a comment. Alma is the name that recurs in the deeper archives, linked to stories of children who either vanish or come back with something in their eyes. People call her the Pale One in some posts, or the Quiet Girl in others. I'm stopping here, in the place where most timelines fork. You can choose to keep listening and follow the trail deeper into the forum archives, where allegations of substitution and the infamous Alma files sit. Or you can close the tab and sleep with a light on. If you follow, know this. The next sets of stories contain the most consistent claims about exchange, about children and parents, and the way social media can make a rumor feel like a map. I have enough material to show you pages of conversations, paraphrase the posts, and highlight the warnings that moderators left before threads were taken down. I will not reproduce any instructions or mechanics from those threads. I will paraphrase and redact anything that looks like a method. What I can tell you is that as the accounts pile up, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Setealem is not just a place, it is a set of signatures that recapitulate across time and space. If you're still with me, the next story is one of the ones that forced me to rethink my own skepticism. An account stitched through with a photograph, a later news clipping, and a voice message that still breaks on its last word. But that's for the next round. For now, take a breath and notice. Ordinary thresholds are everywhere. The bus stop, the drain, the stairwell, the gym locker, the shoulder of a country road. Maybe Setealem is a map of our mistakes, or maybe it's a set of doors we walk through blind. Either way, the city keeps its creases, and sometimes, if you step at the wrong moment, you feel the fabric give. If you chose to keep going, the trail bends darker. The files people called the Alma files arrived in my inbox like a funeral procession. Quiet messages, a single image attached, then a stretch of old forum posts stitched together by users who kept forwarding the same fragments. Alma became a name that gathered everything. The pale child in the photo, the pale child in text, the pale child in rumor. In the threads, Alma was both a character and an axis, the story around which dozens of other threads orbited. The submission that changed my skepticism most came from Fabiano. His message began like a scene from a family drama. Loneliness, a small flat on the edge of the city, the quiet grief of a couple who had tried and failed to have children. He and his wife were private about their attempts, and then one day, they found a baby left in a stroller at a bakery across the street. The kind of detail that reads like a miracle in a soap opera. The baby was pale, tiny, asleep in a blanket with a single smudge of something blue on the hem. No one came to claim her. Fabiano and his wife took her in. Fabiano's tone in the message was both tender and hollow. He wrote about the first weeks as if recalling film clips, midnight feedings, the way his wife hummed to calm the baby, the small rituals you build around something fragile. The locals called her Alma. The child slept oddly, with her hands curled tight, and she watched the ceiling as if something high above the plaster caught her attention. She never cried loud. Her noises were small and precise, like someone aware of being watched even in private. At first, everything was ordinary in the way that love makes ordinary things glow. Then a neighbor, a woman who liked to sit at her window and smoke late, said she'd seen a man in a leather jacket standing in Fabiano's doorway at dawn, looking small and absurd in the winter light. The man never came again. The couple shrugged it off. Then the baby's eyes changed. They went flat. Not black, not luminous, but empty in a way that made family photos look like portraits of strangers. Months later, Fabiano found a small tag under the child's blanket. It was a scrap of leather with a single stamped word, Setealem. He wrote that he'd thought at first it was some misspelling, a maker's mark, until he started finding the name elsewhere, on a collar in another account, on a receipt a stranger had left in a jacket pocket, on a blurred photograph posted by someone with an anonymous handle. The scrap of leather didn't match anything he owned. That's when the posts started to appear, quiet at first, then angrier. Screenshots of old Orkut threads with pages of speculation, screenshots of private messages where a user sent a single line, "She is not ours anymore." Someone posted a scan of a notebook from years earlier. Class notes circled around the word Alma, and a crude drawing of a stairwell. The deeper the files went, the more the tone shifted from personal memory to something like instruction, but always redacted or incomplete. People quoted one another. People began to organize the signatures they found. A stairwell, a green shirt, a drain, a collar, 7, 333. Each post felt like a bone laid on a table. Fabiano later said he couldn't explain the moment he realized the child had changed. One night, he woke to the sound of rustled sheets and found Alma sitting in the dark, facing the open window, hands closed like fists. She looked at him, and in a voice that was almost a whisper said, "They asked for the name." She said it as if naming something settled a debt. He asked what name. She said nothing more. She smiled once, the way a person might smile at a familiar joke whose punchline you don't know, and went back to sleep. A week later, a message arrived from a forum user in another city, posted as a screen cap, and then deleted within minutes. We took her to the stairwell. It opened. The post was followed by a cascade of responses, some chastising the poster for being reckless, some recounting similar moments, others asking for clarification. That's where the contagion becomes visible. Someone posts a dangerous image and hundreds of people with nights to burn read it and pass it on, changing the phrasing, adding myth, testing the air for reaction. Words spread like mold. Fabiano and his wife became withdrawn. They argued in small ways, over bills, over a lullaby, over when to let the child sleep alone. The couple had previously taken comfort in routines. Their routines began to fray. Friends said they changed after nights where they both stared at the same corner of the living room and refused to speak about what they saw reflected in the window glass. Social services knocked on their door once, and the couple handed over the baby's blanket with the scrap of leather tucked inside. The blanket and the tag disappeared into a box somewhere in a municipal office that later reported no chain of custody. The baby stayed. Then came a knock at 3 a.m. Fabiano opened the door and found the neighbor from 2 blocks over with eyes red from crying. "There was a child at my stairwell," she said. "A girl. She had paint on her sleeve. She said she'd lost her way." The neighbor described the child's voice like a bell in fog. Fabiano's heart stopped. The child's description matched Alma. The couple called the police. The girl at the stairwell turned to look at Fabiano through an upstairs window for one long second, and then walked away into the night, disappearing down a corridor that didn't exist anymore when 2 men went to look. Fabiano's message finished with a line that made me stop. When people say Alma is a file, they mean a thing people collect. When people say Alma is a child, they mean a thing people trade. He was careful to say it like a possibility, not a fact. He sent a single image with his message. A small hand curled around a crib rail, pale skin and a smear of blue on the sleeve. The metadata was stripped. No timestamp. What makes the Alma thread dangerous isn't a ritual spelled out in neat steps. It's the way ideas travel and become maps. In some corners of the internet, users take the line, "Hold the child" from the Marta piece and expand it into a menu of metaphorical options. Follow the stairwell, stand in between 2 doors, leave a collar by the gate. In the archived files, the instructions are often paraphrased or incomplete. Go to the stair, call out the name, do not show teeth. The problem isn't that someone will read those words and conjure a portal out of thin air. The problem is that when an idea looks like a way, when it promises control over a terrifying unknown, people will test it. People will try to replicate luck in the hope of repair or gain. That's where harm happens, whether the phenomenon is supernatural or psychological. I won't describe any of the redacted mechanics. I'll only say that Fabiano stopped sharing online. He stopped attending the threads. He told me, in one message, that his wife hummed different songs now and sometimes hummed none at all. He said Alma would occasionally stand at the window and look at something he could not see. He said he had dreams in which a woman with a gray shawl tilted her head and counted out 7 fingers. He ended the message with a request. "If you write this, say that people should not look for it." From the private darkness of the Alma files, the trail moves outward again to a different kind of threshold, one that starts with a bridge. Walter's story came in as a cropped photograph and 3 short voice notes. The photo showed a bridge in silhouette against morning light, a car with its door open, the suggestion of an accident. Walter worked nights as a maintenance worker on a municipal crew and described a rain-slick bridge he had walked to after a call about a downed power line. He said the roadway was oddly quiet for the time of day. A bus lay crushed near a guardrail. He called emergency numbers and helped pull people to the shoulder. He remembered the smell of wet asphalt, the metal tang of something burned, and the thin, tinny sound that arrives after a transformer blows. He was sure he had been there for an hour. The police report listed the accident as a minor fender bender with no injuries. Walter's photograph didn't match the official disposal of events. The photo he'd taken, left on his phone, showed one thing the police report denied: a dog standing at the far side of the bridge staring at the river. The dog wore a collar with tiny stamped letters that, when processed by an amateur user who later posted the image, looked like they spelled Setealem in a crude loop. The image was grainy. The letters could have been anything. Nonetheless, Walter's report included a detail he insisted on. The dog sat without moving, calm as if holding vigil. That night, Walter fainted. He says he woke up under a tree across town 3 days later with a puncture wound on his leg and a sense that he'd crossed a seam he didn't remember. He dreamt of a city made of gray glass and narrow alleys where tall, pale people moved like slow reflections. In a dream within a dream, he saw the dog again, sitting on a rooftop, collar gone, eyes like marbles. Weeks later, Walter found a newspaper clipping tucked under his door. The clipping was yellow with age and bore a headline from a paper in a city 600 miles away, about a sinkhole that swallowed a traffic lane years ago. The clipping's date didn't match any archive. Someone had doctored the timestamp, or the clipping had been misfiled. He could not explain why cities and events seemed to bleed into one another in these reports, why he would wake up out of place with evidence that belonged somewhere else. The dog returned to his neighborhood later, thinner, with a new collar that had no name, and a broad burn mark along its neck. Walter kept the dog, which he named Cow. He placed a small scrap of leather in his toolbox, the kind one uses to pad a wrench, and when he touched it, he said he felt a little jolt in his chest, like a memory trying to start. He gave the scrap to me in an image. The image showed a round piece of leather with faint lettering. It could have been a maker's mark. It could have been the residue of imagination. Walter's story ties to the motif of animals serving as bridges. Dogs appear in many accounts as companions who return with markings that suggest they've been someplace else. They are liminal too, familiar and unerring in their loyalty, but sometimes carrying a token of another world. The idea of a collar stamped with Setealem is repeated enough times to be a fingerprint. Not all the submissions are domestic or rural. Richard's message came from a man I'll describe as a meticulous night owl who keeps a methodical blog about urban life. He wrote about a presence he first mistook for sleep paralysis, then realized was something that had learned to be patient. Richard said the shadow woke him one night. He hadn't moved. He simply felt observed. A shape stood at the foot of his bed, confident and thin. The shape felt like a hand on a warm stove. Richard sat up. The shape turned into a shadow that kept a distance. He followed it to his living room where, in the television's blue glow, a clip was playing on a static-stuck news channel. The clip wasn't live. It was a broadcast from decades away, or at least it looked that way. The headline in the clip read, "In an font Richard later found impossible. 2098, city adapts." The clip lasted 4 seconds, then stopped. On the screen, a billboard flickered with words that made no sense. Numbers strung with letters, like an address written in an alphabet the world had not yet learned. Richard tried to capture it on his phone, but the video he recorded was only 3 seconds long and showed a crosstalk of colors that made no sense. The shadow, in Richard's telling, did something else. It left a mark on a piece of paper he had been working on, a receipt he kept in a drawer. The receipt's ink bled into a strange pattern. Later, when he glanced at it under better light, the blotches aligned into letters he could not read but which looked like a map. The receipt's total was 22 at the time he had purchased a coffee. The printed date on the receipt was a year and a half in the past and a month in the future. The man's tone in the message was not hysterical, but exhausted. He wrote about small compulsions that followed the encounter, walking the perimeter of his apartment building 3 times, checking the locks twice, putting something heavy on the threshold of his door. Richard's account introduces a chilling secondary motif: the future as an artifact that leaks into the present. The clip from 2098 reads like a prophecy rendered as a news segment. People have responded to this motif in different ways, some as evidence of a cosmic joke, others as a genuine crack through which time leaks. Either way, Richard's experience felt like a lesson. Small obediences, like following a map you didn't understand, earn you a kind of attention you would rather not have. Across the ocean, Michael wrote from a city that most listeners will recognize, New York. His story echoes the subway horror that sits comfortably in a city's nerve. Michael was late for work. He missed his usual train on the A line and decided to wait for the next. The platform was emptier than usual. There was a man on the far end wearing a coat too thin for winter and a crooked smile. Michael's watch read 3:33 a.m., a motif that threaded through Raphael's message and others. He boarded the next train. The cars were slow, the lights flickered like someone scanning for a face in a crowd. He got off at his stop, which, in his telling, felt wrong, raw and empty, like a theater with only a few rows of chairs lit. The exit took him into a street that was not the street he had left. It was colder, the air smelling of iron and paper. A vendor on the corner sold newspapers with headlines about cities that did not exist. A woman with eyes too calm handed him a small leaflet that simply said, in weathered ink, "Leave while you still know how." Michael ran back to the station. The platform was lagging. The train routes scrambled on the digital board. He waited 3 hours for a train that finally tunneled into the city like a creature from a cave. And when it arrived, the conductor stared at him as if to say he should not have been off at that stop. The woman on the platform, the calm-eyed woman, had vanished. Later, Michael told me he found a small piece of paper folded into his wallet. A scrap with a child's drawing of a stairwell and the number 7 scribbled in the corner. Michael's narrative fits the parallel city motif. Public transport as a seam where urban grids fold into one another. The subway becomes a muscle that contracts and expels travelers into other maps. The station stops become stairwells, and the city's geometry is suddenly negotiable. Lorena's submission was quieter but no less painful. She wrote about a necklace she found on a bench when she was 17, a thin chain with a pendant shaped like a tiny horn. It felt warm when she picked it up, as if it had just been held. She wore it for a summer because she liked how it chimed with the sound of her keys. Then, one night, she woke to find her dog barking frantically at the front window. When she opened the door, the dog bolted into the stairwell and did not return for 2 days. When the dog came back, it did not jump into her lap as it used to. Instead, it circled the room slowly and stopped at the pendant, sniffing at it with an intensity that made Lorena nervous. The dog pawed at the pendant until its claws left a small burn mark on the chain. The mark would not polish away. Lorena took the necklace to a jeweler who shrugged and said it was nothing, an oxidation pattern. Later, she saw a news post about a dog found wandering the highway 30 miles away, wearing a collar with a pendant snapped in two. The photograph the post attached was grainy, but the pendant's shape matched Lorena's. She tried to throw the necklace away. It always reappeared in her drawer. Once, on a bus, a stranger tapped her shoulder and said, "You shouldn't keep that." The man laughed a nervous laugh and walked off. Lorena removed the pendant and gave it to a friend, who kept it for a week and then mentioned offhand that the pendant had started to hum in the middle of the night. The friend returned it with a flinching apology and refused to explain more. Lorena stopped sleeping with the pendant on. She wore it sometimes when she wanted to feel brave. The necklace attached itself to the motif of objects that do not belong, tokens that adhere to bodies that refuse to be abandoned. Sandro's message pivoted back to the idea of instruments as keys. He wrote about his brother, who played a hand drum in a small bar on the edge of town. One night, a stranger with a leather satchel came in and left the drum behind as if paying a tab with the instrument. The drum was old and plain, its skin weathered in misted rings. The crowd thinned. The drummer and his brother started to play. They said the drum had a deep, steadied rhythm that made the bar slow down, like time losing its outer edge. People in the audience described the drum's sound as addictive, a thrum that made people look at one another as if they had just remembered a shared memory. After the night, Kids in the neighborhood who had been at the bar started to change. Less violent, Sandro wrote, but quieter, as if a weight had settled in their chests. Then, a month later, Sandro's brother stopped playing. He said he dreamt of a rhythm that mapped a stairwell, and when he woke, his hand could not hold the sticks. He vanished from the stage. He left the drum leaning against a wall in their shared garage. Sandro sought his brother for months. He found only a note saying, "The rhythm wants the quiet." A neighbor reported seeing the brother sitting at a stairwell one afternoon, eyes fixed on a doorway that, when the neighbor walked up to it, had no interior at all, just a wall painted a flat gray. The brother's friends said he had become obsessed with the idea of not drumming for them. The drum never left the garage. On a rainy morning, Sandro found the instrument cracked and darkened, as if it had been used in a place where water and music mixed in a way that erodes things. The drum's motif returns to the instrument as trigger image. Objects played or worn that insist on a different tempo in your life. These accounts lead us, finally, into the montage that stitches together what we've been seeing. Across cities and languages, people report the same fingerprints. Children who return changed, small tokens that cannot be accounted for. Times, 333, the number 7. Repeating with a pressure that suggests a language. Not a coincidence. Motorcycles haunt country roads. Drains whisper at night. Stairwells appear as a recurring geography of return and loss. What does it all mean? There are ways to parse this without invoking anything beyond the human mind. Collective anxiety creates shared images. Stories spread and mutate on forums and social networks. Urban legends stabilize because they answer questions we are afraid to ask. Where do missing things go? Why do strangers sometimes behave as if they know a secret about you? The internet makes it easy to pass a rumor along, to legitimize a fragment with repetition. That is the mundane explanation, and it's a solid one. Then there are the psychological readings. Trauma, dissociation, sleep paralysis, hallucination magnified by isolation. Another rational frame is the scam or prank. Coordinated messages, staged photography, the dark art of attention-seeking. People want stories. Stories get constructed on Twitter and replies. People add details because the detail earns validation. It happens. But when you sit with all the pieces, Alma's tag, the dog's collar that appears in 2 separate cities, receipts with dates shifted, children with a fixation on the stairwell, something else presses. Not proof. Never that. Only the weight of repetition. Once a motif climbs to the surface in enough hands, it behaves like a gravity well. Details bend toward it. That's not the same as supernatural verification, but it's also not nothing. If there is a pattern, if Setealem is more than a name and becomes a diagnostic lens, then it's a pattern of thresholds. What we cross without noticing are the places where the world has seams. The door between cars and street, the step between station and platform, the rusted grill over a drain. The stories suggest these seams sometimes open. People walk through. They come back. They do not always return unscathed. That is the ethical hazard of such myths. Once an idea offers a map, people will test the map. They will post instructions. They will post pictures of stairwells and tag them. They will attach a hashtag and crowdsource an experiment. Some will be seeking healing. Some will be seeking proof. Some will be looking for a way to replace what they've lost. The Alma files show how quickly grief can be converted into attempt. That is a danger I cannot understate. Myth moves fast. So does desperation. So what do we do with these stories as listeners? We archive them with care. We note the fingerprints and mark where patterns are strong. We refuse to promulgate instructions. We do not encourage experiments. We respect the trauma embedded in anonymous posts. We credit the possibility that a child's narrative about 7 days is as real to that child as any memory. We allow for multiple explanations at once. People emailed after the first group of stories went up. Some sent their own little proofs. Photographs of collars, audio recordings of drains at 3:33 a.m., screenshots of an old forum thread. Others wrote philosophical notes about liminality and spaces in cities where you can get lost for reasons both psychological and material. One person in a long message suggested that Setealem is a cultural pothole, a place where different anxieties of a society collect and throb. Another wrote in a short line, "My grandmother used to say there are hollows in the city where names leak," and attached a photograph of a stairwell with chipped paint. I will end where the accounts often end, in a place that demands humility. None of this is proof. None of this is sermon. These are reports. They are the voices of people who have looked at their lives and noticed an edge. They are the desperate attempts to map an experience that resists tidy explanation. If something inhabits that edge, if there is a pattern that repeats across cities and years, it behaves like a myth that wants to be known. My job here is not to declare it true or false, but to show you the fingerprints so you can make up your own mind. If you are watching this at night, if you feel the pipes in your home hum differently after midnight, if the drain in your bathroom ever sounds like a tune pulled through a keyhole, take a breath. Have compassion for the people who report these things. Don't turn curiosity into a recipe. Don't treat rumor as instruction. If you are tempted to search out the archived threads, or to click on files that promise to show you Alma, pause. The internet has the power to amplify longing and to turn private grief into a public contagion. Before I close, I'll tell you what the last messages from the people I mentioned had in common. Luciano gave up his usual bus route. Antonia kept the green shirt in a locked box. Julio learned the habit of counting tiles. Tommy moved the dog's collar into a shoebox and labeled it with a date. Raphael stopped showering at 3:33 a.m. Fabiano left a light on in the nursery. Walter kept the dog inside at night. Richard took an axiom from all of this and started to document everything with a camera until the camera stopped working during moments he later listed as seams. Michael now checks 2 platforms before boarding any train. Lorena wears a different pendant. Sandro never let his brother touch the drum again. These are small, practical things. Behaviors people adopt to impose some order on a disorder they can't yet name. They are also the quiet evidence of trauma. That is the human element beneath the myth. Whether Setealem is a collective imagination, an emergent folklore, or something that tugs at the edges of reality, the human fallout is the same. Lives altered, routines adjusted, nights kept light. If you have a story like this, something small that doesn't fit, a detail that made you look twice, share it. I read everything that comes to this inbox. We have a submission form in the description that respects anonymity. If you send proof, send what you can. And be mindful of privacy and harm. And please do not post instructions or replications in the comments. If a thread looks like it's turning toward instruction, flag it and step back. Uncover Setealem. It's a phrase that started as curiosity and turned, for many, into a list of things to watch. For others, it became a warning. For some, it is a grief they cannot fix. For all of us, it is a pattern worth attending to with skepticism and with care. If this video unsettled you and you want more, subscribe. If you have a personal encounter, an odd receipt, a collar, a stairwell, a photograph, share it in the form linked below. I read them. We'll keep sorting through the fingerprints together. One last thing before the lights go down. Ordinary thresholds are everywhere. A turnstile, a bus stop, a shower drain, a stairwell no one notices. Step lightly, and if you find a door you did not open, consider this. Some doors might close by themselves, and some doors might not want you to remember walking through them.